Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody had a wonderful lunch and had a chance to either get outside on the rooftop or visit the Mobile American Job Center from the DC Department of Employment Services. I have the pleasure to introduce our next panel, which has a focus on the United States and the technology and digital tools being used to transform public employment services in the United States, and demonstrating the experience of the United States with a wide range of panelists. So in the United States, job seekers, working learners, and displaced workers are turning to employment services organizations for help navigating complex issues at the intersection of life, learning, and work. Today, we're going to look at how employment service agencies and workforce development agencies are keeping up with the shifting needs of workers and learners. So with that, I have the pleasure to introduce Pam Gerasimides. Pam works at the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. And with that, Pam, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch, and welcome to NASWA, and welcome to the United States. My name is Pam, and as you heard from Charlie, I work for NASWA. In fact, I started working at NASWA 21 years ago. In about 3 days, it will be 21 years. And my first assignment was, the first day I was here, was to help staff an international conference with WAPES and the EU at the time. So 21 years later, almost to the day, here we are having this discussion, except I'm standing back here this time. Okay, with that, I want to introduce Josh Kopes, and who is going to be co-presenting with me, and Patti Konstantakis. So welcome to them, from our partner organizations. So today what we're going to talk about, the session focuses on how technology impacts the United States workforce development system and vice versa. So I'm going to start with Josh talking a little bit about what the US workforce looks like, so everybody's on the same page and has some context when we're talking about technology. Then we're going to talk about what the state agencies, what their role is vis-a-vis technology, what are some of their challenges, what are some solutions, then some of the things that NASWA is doing. I'm going to talk to you about my newest initiative called the Workforce IT Support Center, or Workforce ITSC. And I'm going to turn to my colleagues who are going to talk to you more from the local perspective, give you that from a local lens, and share a lot of information with you from their recent work, and give you some examples of innovations that are transpiring as we speak. So without further ado, let's dive into this. Okay, so in the United States, the thing to walk away from this slide is that the workforce development system is split between the federal, state, and local levels. And I want you to know that there's a lot of independence and a lot of flexibility around each of these levels. In the federal agency level, primarily the funds come from the U.S. Department of Labor, the Employment and Training Administration, but there are other funding sources that funnel into the system. And these folks work on give us the funding, the oversight, the regulations, and help set the performance parameters, the performance goals. Then we move to the state level, which is my members. We're a private nonprofit organization that represents state workforce development agencies. So our states are the ones who administer the programs. They provide the technology framework upon which the workforce systems operate. And they negotiate the statewide performance measures. They administer some of the programs also. And they coordinate the services with the local outlets. And then finally, you get to the local level. You have the American Job Centers. Think of this as the brick and mortar manifestation of the services, right? This is where the employers and the job seekers go to get in-person services. Now, this is a little bit of a simplified version, because in between, there are state workforce boards that provide advisory capacity to the states, to the governor, and then the local workforce investment boards also. So just keep that in mind. Let's see here. So in terms of the systems, now think of all kinds of funding streams coming out of DC, pouring into a state, each different programs, different regulations, different requirements. The primary programs are the unemployment insurance program, and this is a kingdom unto itself. So for the purposes of today's conversation, we're not going to be focusing on that. We're going to be talking about the workforce development side, not the workforce security side. WIOA, or the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is the founding piece, the keystone piece for the workforce development system in the United States. The Labor Market Information Piece, or LMI, the acronym, Employment Services, and the Veterans Employment Services. Two things here. When these programs come into the state, they might not all be in one agency. So there might be a couple of different workforce agencies at a state level. The other thing to keep in mind is under the WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the new requirements involve having the adult education programs and the vocational rehabilitation programs also integrate both in terms of customer services, but also performance reporting, which is sort of a new world that we're living in. Two more things on this slide. This is a universal system. It's supposed to serve everybody, yet it has also a focus on special pipelines of job seekers, the veterans, disabled older youth, older adults, disadvantaged youth, and in periods like the Great Recession, the unemployed and the long-term unemployed. And then finally here, you know, the services are delivered through self-service technology. So there's a technology aspect of it, and then the face-to-face and the one-stop level. I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense. This is from calendar year 2018 from the U.S. Department of Labor. In 2018, we served about 7.5 million people, down from the bigger numbers that we saw during the Great Recession. That hovered between 15 to 20 million, depending on what time period in that recession. And on unemployment insurance, there were about 5.2 million folks and on unemployment insurance. And what I wanted to show you here, that 72% of those people were also receiving employment services. This also shows you all the other programs that are involved with in the workforce development world. Just a smattering of them: the youth program, the dislocated worker. You could see that Wagner-Pizer, which is the employment services, has one of the largest groups. On the other side, you see TAA, the trade adjustment assistance, and the apprenticeship information. One thing to keep in mind, too, is when I talk about the 7.5 million here, that is only the people who are registered to get the services. So there could be a lot of self-services that are going on online. So, you do not see that number captured here. And I think Josh will talk about that a little bit later, too. Josh.
I'll talk about it right now. Give you guys a little bit of background about myself. I am with an organization now called JFF Labs, which is actually an innovation arm of an organization called JFF, or Jobs for the Future. Jobs for the Future has existed here in the United States for about 35 years and has provided a range of services to education, workforce development, and employment service organizations across the country in that 35-year history. I have spent almost my entire career working within the workforce development sphere, or employment service sphere as we know it. I actually worked locally for a local workforce board. I spent about 8 years at the National Association of Workforce Boards. And most recently at Labs, I've actually been deeply investigating how U.S. employment services and workforce development are utilizing technology. And even more, I think, concisely trying to understand what some of the connections are between technology and also the digitization of information through data, and how those things are interconnected and interrelated. It's very helpful for me, and I would imagine very helpful for all of our international friends here in the audience, to actually get a feel for the size and scope of what we're talking about here. As Pam mentioned, there are agencies that represent the work that we do at the federal level in all 50 states and 5 U.S. territories, there are also a number of, if you want to actually go to the next slide there,
Sure.
Pam, there are also what Pam referred to as workforce development boards. These organizations are responsible for the oversight of employment service delivery through the one-stop career centers. And I will say what Pam hit on there with just the ETA services is one small slice of actually all of the federal investments that are being made in workforce development and employment services broadly. So many of these organizations on the ground are not only responsible for managing and deploying funds that come through the Employment and Training Administration, but are also increasingly responsible for a variety of funds that are being deployed through other federal programs from the Department of Justice, from the Department of Agriculture, and so on and so forth. So that's all to say that as we think about how training is actually deployed throughout the system, how these investments are actually made, and where technology plays a role in trying to solve for some of the challenges that these systems were created to solve for, we really have to think about the different layers of service from the state agency level, the workforce board level, and then all the way down to what Pam referred to as the brick and mortar, or really the retail outlets for the US system. This is where people are actually walking through the door of a physical location and asking someone for help. Increasingly, they are very quickly being sat in front of a computer to access many of those services and many of those kinds of advice and guidance supports that we've provided face to face in the past. So I think that's something that I want everybody to keep in their mind as we think about where we're actually meeting the people that we're trying to serve. And I would also want to say here that when we talk about the number of people that are actually walking through the doors of these centers and receiving some level of service, it's actually upwards of close to 20 million if we include those that are literally walking into that center and may only access the internet. They're not necessarily being enrolled in any sort of employment service or any sort of training program, but they are benefiting from the fact that that physical infrastructure exists, and in many cases are actually relying on that physical location to provide them access to the internet, provide them access to a computer, and introduce them to a whole host of digital tools and technologies that can not only help them while they're in the center, but that we also hope that they can access and rely on when they go back home or when they go to other community support organizations to help them in their job search and help them in their navigation.
And Josh, I want to add a comment here that since 2003, that number has declined from a little over 3,500 centers to 2,403. This was a number as of yesterday. So that also shows that that the footprint is being kind of shrinking, and so there's even more reliance on the online services piece too.
So this is really what motivates me about the work that we do, and I think for many of us that think about the work that we do in employment service and workforce development from a systems level, it sometimes is easy to forget about the millions of people that are actually coming to us looking for help. So I think what I really want everybody to recognize here is that we have a very diverse clientele that we are trying to service here through our workforce development employment service centers here in the United States. I was very struck by the Australians who are actually trying to think about how various clients coming through the job centers have varying degrees of digital literacy and digital awareness. I think that is something that we're seeing increasingly applied to the work that we're doing at the local level as well, appreciating that the people that are coming through the doors of our career centers, yes, their ultimate goal is to connect to employment. Yes, their goal is to receive access to employment services or training resources. But they're also increasingly trying to figure out how to navigate all aspects of life. And they're looking for any sort of tools, any sort of advantage that they can get on how they can actually navigate questions around housing, around childcare, around transportation. And our employment service system is increasingly being relied on to provide that kind of life and living and learning advice, as well as access to some of the more traditional employment services that we've provided in the past.
So I'd like to go back to tell you a little bit about what are some of the key state technology roles. So what role do my members play in terms of technology, right? So the first thing they offer is assessment systems that do assessment, registration, and intake, and case management. So this is on the job training side of the house. They also do, they built and operate the performance reporting systems. So collecting the data from the locals and reporting it up to the federal government. They also operate eligible training provider lists. So if you are a job seeker and you have a voucher to go to training, the folks that you get your training from have to be vetted based on certain eligibility that the state and the feds help establish, and that's then presented to the consumers too, and states are responsible for providing that information. Employer tracking tools and labor exchange. Labor exchange, basically job banks, state job banks, and the employer tracking tools. So not everybody who operate, goes and has visits with employers, that there's a coordination, so you're not, going to the same employers over and over. Labor market information, anywhere from, wage, occupational information, skills growing, and then presenting that information for career awareness to the consumer, to the job seeker consumer. Customer communications, they're starting to have a lot of job seeker, the ability for job seekers to see their information, what UI benefits, unemployment insurance benefits you are due, what is the next follow-up activity that you have to do. So dashboards for the job seekers. I mentioned that we have a lot of different programs coming in with different requirements. So the fiscal management, the fiscal administration, so fiscal software. And then finally, again, unemployment insurance systems, both on the benefit side, but also the taxes, and I might add adjudication. But again, I had to mention that because it's a big part of the system. So let's talk a little bit about key state technology challenges now. I don't know if you guys are experiencing this, but we certainly are. We have flat or declining funding, federal funding, and that impacts the infrastructure. Aging, we have a lot of aging infrastructures. So, and on top of that, we have competing program priorities. So it's hard enough to have competing priorities when you have money on the technology side. It's even harder when you don't. And on top of that, here's some of the other things. Integration with program partners. I mentioned how we are to work with our adult ed and with our VR, vocational rehabilitation partners. By the way, adult ed in the United States is where folks go if they don't speak English very well, or if they don't have a high school degree. So that's the kind of population that is dealt with in adult ed. And vocational rehabilitation deals with people who have more severe disabilities and helping with employment. And another partner is basically what we call TANF, but it's the welfare programs, and they also have a work component. So, all these programs have their own infrastructure, their own culture, their own technology issues, and now we're expected to have case management that cuts across, and also performance reporting that cuts across. Business process reengineering. If you're going to automate a bad process, you're going to get a bad technology system. So you really have to pay attention and spend some time in reengineering your business process. That takes time. It impacts technology. Understanding of cutting edge technology practices, staff skills training. In the United States, you have the attracting and retaining issue, especially when it comes to IT, because government is not going to pay as much as the private sector. Also, in a lot of the states, governors have centralized the technology practices, the technology operations. So instead of having an IT shop within a workforce agency, it's pulled and it's in a a governor's entity. And then there's requirements around, what you're going to do with your security protocols, how you're procuring. So all these things add up on the technology side. Legal or perceived limitations. I'm going to talk about this. Refers to data. And data analysis is the new frontier for the workforce systems, I think for every industry, really. So here, how do we help? And sometimes there are real legal reasons that you can't share that information, and others it's more of a cultural thing that has been sort of hardened in place, right? Cost-efficient infrastructure, but with tools that are also flexible and effective. So, and this has to do both with working with the locals, but also our other partner agencies. So we want to make sure that there is no spending money on the same type of tools, like job banks, but that or case management systems, but that the states build systems that are flexible to meet the needs of the locals and of the partners, and that are also effective. And then finally, in this, limited private vendor options, for many reasons in the United States, it's a very specialized field. This is a perception that a lot of people have, that there's not a lot of options. And if you look at, and I'll talk about our information, the project that I'm working on, about half the states, both in workforce agencies and adult ed and vocational rehabilitation, use a private solution, and the other half, for a lot of dollar figure issues, have cobbled together their own systems that we call them their homegrown systems.
So it's interesting that there are a lot of commonalities between some of the things that I see local workforce boards and American Job Centers struggling with that are similar to what some state agencies are dealing with. Certainly the decline in resources, certainly the attempts to not duplicate multiple technology resources that all serve the same purposes. There are no shortage of local organizations that are managing multiple data collection systems, that have purchased several different licenses to various online learning services. The list goes on. I think one of the things that I would really want to highlight that I think is a key distinction in how we're experiencing and thinking about the use of technology at a local level compared to the state level is really almost, as opposed to maybe only having a few vendors or a few partners who can actually build tools and technologies that can solve some of our challenges around federal compliance or around creating a statewide job board, we're seeing an almost explosion of technology that's being geared towards workforce development and education and training and all sorts of different realms. I'm going to go through a little bit later and actually talk about those different kinds of technologies and how they're being used. But I think it's very important to recognize here that at the local level within the career centers, there is a lot of difficulty right now to navigate the number of new tools and technologies that are being introduced and finding ways of applying those tools to solve for some of the dynamic challenges that we're trying to help those 20 million people that I flashed up on the screen a few minutes ago effectively connect to education and effectively connect to employment opportunities.
So I want to go back to what can be done, and really I'm talking from the state level, so some solutions, right? So we could look for additional funding to support aging infrastructure, but the current climate isn't really one that would help facilitate that kind of option. And so we leave that to our members and to our legislative committee and our policy committees at NASWA. The second thing that we could do is we could look to provide systemic tools. And I want to talk to you about the National Labor Exchange. And I don't know if you have gotten a briefing on the National Labor Exchange. If you haven't, please get with Charlie Terrell and Emma Northcott. And this is an initiative that NASWA has offered with our partnership with Direct Employers Association, and Candy is here. Candy Chambers, I think she spoke to you guys yesterday. This has allowed us to provide a no-cost job feed that has excellent quality of jobs. I believe right now we're at 2.4 to 2.5 million jobs on average per day. And these jobs are not duplicated from vetted employers and are refreshed daily. So this feeds into the state job banks at no additional cost. So it's a great value, and I think brings a lot of value to the employers who are participating in it too, because we have a huge number of job seeker traffic going directly to corporate career websites. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time in my on the two last pieces, focus on training and technical assistance. And what do we want to do there? We want to help individual agencies have and maintain a sophisticated understanding of what their options are when it comes to doing their strategic technology plans, when they're trying to engage with vendors, or when they're building their own internal system. Some of these concepts that are listed below there are things that we have heard from our policy committees, which are the career level staff from the state workforce agencies, but also during our focus groups. So agile and user-centric. So agile, a nice buzzword. What it means is when you're developing a technology system, you don't wait until the end or the huge first phase of the project to review it. You do it as you're going along and you're making changes. User-centric, you keep the customer, who this system is going to be used by, in mind at all times, and you have them participate in the development. They test it for you. Modular systems. Remember the list that I showed you about all the different sort of technology pieces that the workforce agencies conduct? So instead of creating one gigantic system, develop one piece of that at a time. That allows you to minimize risk, that allows you to increase competition, and that allows you to have best in breed work with you. But that also requires that you have an open architecture, a framework, an enterprise framework that these modular pieces could hook into, and that there's common standards, so these modular pieces could communicate and exchange information. And then finally, the automated deployment pipeline. It's a nice three-word expression, but basically, you all have cell phones. When you get a system update, what happens? You press a button and you update your phone. So why not that for a system that you're operating as a state government? But that needs to be written in the program design from the beginning. So that automated deployment pipelines. Another thing we should be focusing on is to facilitate cross-agency and cross-state data analysis. But we want to do this to be able to answer specific policy questions to help us with evidence-based policy making and our program development, right? So these are some of the critical areas that we are focusing on and should be focusing on.
So yeah, I want to use this as an opportunity to kind of introduce Patti. So Patti and I actually have only been working together for about a year and a half, but we started on our project when she was with Digital Promise, actually trying to deeply investigate and understand the entire data ecosystem around adult learning and workforce development. So it was very interesting that some of the work that I was doing, trying to understand how data was being collected in the workforce system, collided with a lot of the work that Patti was doing at the time and continues to do up until this moment. So Patti, I want to give you a chance.
Yeah, so I come to this work from the adult education side of this, having worked with adult learners for most of my career in technology. And as he says, we undertook a big landscape analysis about a year or so ago amongst all of sort of the local ecosystem. To a certain extent, obviously, we took into account the state level as well, but really trying to understand how connected is that ecosystem from a data point of view. And the short answer is not at all. So But what we did learn was that people really wanted it to be connected. So there were people, most of these local systems are thinking about, they're rethinking their notion of what success looks like, really. And as they think about like how are our programs successful, they're really needing the data to try to understand that. And so as I've said here, they are starting to think about how they might create shared metrics of success. What we're doing here in California or in DC or whatever, can we all mean the same thing when we're talking about measures of success? They're really looking for ways to connect their data with others in other agencies and other organizations, et cetera. So they're really looking to try to do that. And there are examples, and we can talk about them later, but there are examples of folks doing that in Excel spreadsheets. Like, can we get your data and your data and your data, and what can we tell about our programs so we can improve them? The big motivator behind all of this is how can we actually serve our learners, our workers, our job seekers? How do we serve them better at this point?
The one thing I just want to add with this, kind of to help us really seat this concept of data in the conversation with technology is, yes, data is one part of technology conversation. Increasingly, information is being digitized. It's being collected through technological resources, and it's being transmitted through digital means. But what's really part and parcel with, I think, our interest and our kind of newfound obsession in data isn't just in a quest to try and collect and aggregate all that information. It's actually being prompted by kind of a shifting philosophy around how we think about the interconnectedness of work and employment with all the other things that we do as a public sector. So again, I talked about those people who are coming through the doors of the career centers. Most of them are not coming in and the first thing they're saying is, I need a job. The first thing they're actually saying is, I would like to have a job, but I also need to figure out how I find childcare. I need to figure out how I get my criminal record cleared. These are things that right now are really starting to collide and intersect with this conversation around how do we effectively help someone enter employment. And it's really not until we have the data and until we understand the intersection and the interdependence of how we think about work and learning on some of the other systems and some of these other social services that we're providing, will we be able to really effectively provide the kinds of services and support to the people who are looking for us, ultimately for that job, but also relying on workforce development and employment services to solve some of those other foundational issues that are impacting them, that are preventing them from effectively entering employment.
So up against this context, this kind of background, I wanted to talk to you about what happened next. Our members, through the Employment and Training Policy Committee that we have, advocated for the creation of a place, if you could imagine a place where people could go, state workforce folks could go to get the information and the training and the technical assistance they need around the business of technology. So in 2017, the Department of Labor funded the creation of Workforce ITSC, IT Support Center. And our mission is there to implement integrated technology, remember with adult ed and vocational rehabilitation, solutions that are effective, cost efficient, and innovative. So we have 3 strategic goals. Our first strategic goal is to provide information, to raise awareness about all the kinds of things that I've been talking to you about, and the kinds of innovations that are happening. The second one is to offer technical assistance, and the third ultimately is to help facilitate customer service integration and alignment. So how are we going to do that? Because that's a really big charter and mission. We focus on 3 main business lines. We begin with the sharing market research information, and I'm going to show you the kinds of tools we're creating. The second one is to offer staff capacity building around digital literacy, right, through our online learning. And the third is to coordinate other direct technical assistance. And we're actively working on 1 and 2, and we're working on our plan for number 3. So here are online tools. It's a set of 4 tools. I'm going to start with the state technology profiles. It's an interactive visualization. So you could go in and see what kind of technology state workforce agencies are using to implement their WIOA plans, their WIOA vision. So you could see, they're using this particular vendor. This is how long they've used it. This is when they're planning on updating it, what kind of data they're exchanging, that sort of thing. So right now we have 30 profiles completed, and that's across all the programs that we're talking about. The solutions marketplace, we felt like, and we have a steering committee that's comprised of all kinds of partners, a place to showcase the technology tools that are out there. So not only from the private vendor side, but also nonprofit tools and also consultants that are in this space, not necessarily the people who build the system, but the people who help facilitate the business process. So creating a place for state workforce agencies to be able to go and look at this information. A procurement portal, a place where you could see all the open procurements that are going on across the United States. And, let's face it, people could go and look at this language and copy and use it and not start from scratch, or at least see what somebody else is thinking or how they're proceeding with what their procurements. And then finally, a library. I want this to be a lean thing where you could see online resources that directly apply to the business of technology. How do you do a budget? What are the regulations? Things that pertain to this field. So all this together is going to help inform the market research that we want to provide. So, and I know it's one thing to have information and another thing to have intelligence. So once we get something built up in here and get all the data going, we want to do a sort of state of the state workforce technology thing. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We just looking at this, there's 131 in the 30 states that we have in the state technology profiles. There's 131 technology systems operating WIOA systems, WIOA programs. Half of those are supported by private vendors. The other half are homegrown. There's 85 different agencies in those 30 states supporting these technology systems. 23 out of the 30 states say they plan on replacing their system within the next 1 to 3 years, and 14 of those say that they're going to do it in the next year. So some business intelligence that's being put together, and we hope that will help guide what we're developing in terms of our technical assistance. So the last piece I have to share with you is the staff capacity building, and this staff capacity building is going to be, build on, NASWA has a long history of providing staff skills development, and also this is going to be incorporated and under our learning services. We have a very sophisticated operation that's been built by other colleagues that I'm going to capitalize on, believe it or not. And so what is this? It's a learning academy for workforce professionals engaged in the business of technology, and we want it to launch this year. Why? Because staff digital literacy is important in order to operationalize your program and your policy vision. What we're going to do is going to be online, on-demand training, courses and certificates. We've done a lot of demand analysis and environmental assessments. We're going to repurpose what we have. We're going to create or curate new training, and we're working with a host of subject matter experts, instructional designers, and advisory groups. So very excited about this. The first course, the first certificate that we're working on is, there's a lot of program folks that work in state agencies that get drafted to work with the technology companies when you're, or in designing what the request for proposals is going to be. Those folks might know the program well, but they don't have the skills to work with the technology company. So this first certificate is going to be providing those folks with what we call business analysis skills. The second certificate is going to focus on digital transformation for leaders. And, this is, what are, those concepts that I was talking about earlier in plain English, what do those mean? What should you know as a leader, as a manager, when you're undertaking a technology project? What are the 10 things your colleagues want to share with you that they wish they had known before they started the project? Or what are the 10 things they know that worked so well for them that they want to tell you about it so you could be successful too? So that's what we're working on. I gotta get fired up about these kind of things, but nerd, workforce nerd. So I'm gonna turn it over to Josh now, they're gonna talk a little bit more about their work. Yeah, let's do this.
I'm still digesting after lunch like everybody else here. So I've heard kind of two phrases tossed around, and I toss these two phrases around quite a bit as well. One is digital transformation, and one is digital literacy. The way I really think about digital transformation is how do we increasingly use technology to make the systems and the business processes of the business of delivering employment services more effective, more efficient, and frankly just easier for the people that are trying to access the services that we provide, and get them connected to that resource and introduce them to that solution as quickly as possible. That's the beautiful part of what technology can do. Technology can help us make things that are inefficient, that are ineffective, more streamlined, get people access to information, tools, and resources faster than we've been able to in the past. On the other side of the ledger here is really this question around digital literacy. And it really is this notion now that to be digitally literate really isn't that much different than it was to be literate maybe 10 or 20 years ago. The ability to actually interact with a computer is now really a portal to the world. It's the portal to information. It's the portal to many of the resources that we are all offering through our agencies. And we must first equip people with the ability to have that kind of digital literacy so that they can effectively interact with these tools. That applies not only to the clients that we're trying to serve, but it applies to all of our employees as well. It applies to the people that are actually being put in a place where they have a client who's asking them to help them set up an email address, where they have someone coming in who literally does not know how to turn the computer on. If that person who's been put in a position of power and is being asked for help is not able to effectively use some of these digital resources and tools, then we put them in a place where they're actually not able to apply their humanity in a way that many of the folks that are in that position of counselor or case manager or navigator, that's ultimately what they're striving to do. I'm going to turn this over to Patti and let her give you the whole history of workforce EdTech.
So Josh and I are involved in a lot of work that's really addressing exactly what he's talking about, right? So how is it that we bring some of our organizations through this digital transformation, and then how do we also increase the digital literacy of our 20 million or so job seekers, learners, workers, et cetera. So the first effort started, only a year ago, goodness, in which we were focusing on those organizations and some of the needs that they had. And the first effort here was something that we call Workforce EdTech. And it came to be as part of a coalition of several organizations here in the United States. One of them actually is World Education. Maybe some of you have heard of them. They work worldwide, but they have a very strong presence here in the United States around adult education and technology at this particular point too. There's another organization here in the U.S. called the International Society of Technology and Education, ISTE, who really work in the K-12 space, but are really trying to bring all of the work that they do in professional development and really increasing that technology capacity in all of those teachers out there. Seems like we could also bring that same set of work into this realm as well. And of course, Jobs for the Future also is the other folks who are coming at it from a workforce space, et cetera. So we banded together and said, hey, some of the first, and much like the kinds of things that Pam is talking about, a notion of a repository and categorizing of all of those tools. As Josh talked about earlier, there is a multitude of tools and people are trying to figure out what do I do and how do I use them and all that kind of stuff. So there's that. Before you go too far there, I want to give another shout out to the that coalition has now actually expanded and evolved into a new program that we're calling Digital Us. And it's digital capital us, so it looks like it could be digital US as well, on purpose. Because what we're really trying to do is, starting next year in 2020, we want to, in 10 years, actually help all Americans really have those foundational digital skills that they need to really thrive in work today, or really in life today. And so those same key organizations are there, but we've also added another 20 or so organizations, including employers and several, who are all going to band together. And this is a new initiative that we've started to launch. I'd love to invite you guys to go to joindigitalus.org and join us and get some updates as we go through and do that. But it's all in the same realm of how do we help these organizations, like how do we help both the learner worker get the skills that they need and equip all of those organizations that are working to serve those folks, equip them also with the capacity that they need as well. And I'll let you go.
Sure. So Pam spent some time talking about how much work that NASWA has done to understand kind of that statewide view of technology systems that are really designed, again, to help manage the various programs that states and their counterparts at the local level are responsible for collecting data and managing some of the service delivery and case management of. Through workforceedtech.org and through this Digital Us partnership and some of the work that I've been trying to lead at Jobs for the Future, we tried to dig one layer deeper into understanding how local service delivery was being influenced by the growth of new tools and technology. And I think one of the most difficult things for us as we set out on this landscape analysis was really to even try and set a framework for how we understood what technology was and what it was trying to solve. So I think one of the most important contributions that was actually made by all the partners who are participating in Digital Us was to sit down and try and develop a common set of tools and phrases that would help us actually understand what it is we meant when we talked about a specific type of technology. I will read these off quickly, just recognizing it's an international audience. Learning and training is one tool category, job search and placement is another, mentorship and support, organizational management, assessment and matching, and IT systems and policy. A lot of the kinds of technologies that Pam and NASWA is focusing on, really trying to catalog and understand, are some of these tools that are being used to create large IT systems and are being used to help states and local organizations effectively manage policy and effectively collect and understand the outcomes of the programs that are being provided through those federal and state systems. A lot of the technologies that we've attempted to catalog and are included on workforceedtech.org give a more complete picture of some of the tools that are being introduced and put in the hands of job seekers to help them better navigate the labor market, or to help them access training and education resources in new and different ways. Just so I'll give you one example of the exponential growth in employment technology as we know it, at least here in the United States. At JFF Labs, we recently did an entire land scan of assessments, digital assessments that were being created by startups and companies, just focused on helping assess people for their fitfulness in careers in IT. We were able to identify almost 400 companies around the globe that were providing some sort of digital assessment or matching instrument that would help theoretically connect a job seeker to a job or opportunities in IT. We have actually published that landscape scan, and you can access that on jff.org. Look for our 2020 assessment scan, which will actually show in very specific detail a subset of those companies that are providing assessment throughout the workforce ecosystem. I want to make sure that we do have some time, which I think we do, to actually provide specific examples around how technology is being used to drive innovation and how we think about collection, aggregation, analysis of data, how technology is actually changing how some of our organizations at the local level operate, and finally looking at how some of those many tools that were listed in that last slide are actually being utilized to transform and reinvent how we deliver service. The first up is data innovation.
So again, from some of the work that I've done around data and how our systems are connected or not connecting, there's several good examples, and I'm going to give you two of them. One of them is kind of at a statewide level that is happening here close by in Virginia. And the interesting thing about this particular example is, I always say it's great for sort of the data plumbing to be in place, right? The systems can talk to each other, but if the people don't actually talk to each other, it doesn't really work, right? So what Virginia has done is actually form what they're calling a data trust, which is really getting all of the agencies together, all of the people in those agencies, not all of the people, but key people in each of those agencies, to really put together a set of, to work as a collaborative group and put together a set of rules, processes, and governance, basically, that for how they're really going to share, exchange, report, analyze on all of that data. So they go into the process. So they haven't actually connected all their systems yet, but they recognize that the first thing that they need to do is actually set those rules and processes in place so that they can move forward more efficiently rather than just trying to cobble it together. So it's in pilot at this particular moment. So I can't really speak to I wonder how it worked. Stay tuned. Maybe next year we'll have some better ideas about that. This next example is happening in California in a small community called Lake Tahoe. Maybe some of you are skiers and have heard of it. But there's a consortium there. They've gotten together as a community, and actually kind of sparked by the employers in that community. It's a big hospitality is really their sector there, and fueled by a talent shortage. Some of the big employers there were went to their workforce boards, went to their education providers, and said, what can we do as a community to really provide us more talent, more qualified talent, I suppose. And what they did was get together, and as a community, they've actually put together, using one of these many vendors that you're talking about, they've put together a system in which they are sharing all of their data. And so employers get the data, the workforce boards get the data, so a learner can come into the system more quickly and easily, and those referrals become much more streamlined because it's not about a phone call, it's actually all appears on the dashboard for folks, including that learner. So that learner can also figure out, where do I go for the training so that I can get the job at Harvey's Casino or whatever, right? That's where that goes. What's super interesting about this one really is that the community came together to put it together. So those people pieces were kind of, I don't know that circumvented is the right word, but they were accelerated, because here's a community that understood, that had common purpose, and said, yeah, let's do it this way. And so they've done a really nice job of that. It's a great example.
So I will say, before kind of rip through these last few case study examples, we actually will be publishing quite a number of these case studies around how workforce systems at the local level are utilizing and leveraging technology in new and different ways. So I will offer very cursory remarks about what we're seeing here in just a few case study examples throughout the U.S. So in the state of Florida, we have a local workforce investment board known as Career Source Florida that has actually found a way to create a comprehensive IT strategy, not only for their local workforce board, but they are actually working to provide IT support services for some of their surrounding workforce development agencies, and have actually created a unified and singular call center where any calls that come through a whole host of social service organizations within their region are actually all ported through the Career Source Central Florida and are actually triaged as though they were an employment service issue first and foremost, and then they're upgrading all of their systems to actually be in line with that kind of single intake experience, not only in the Career Center, not only on the web, but also when people call into the center as well. There's an organization called Connexus. Again, this is a local workforce board located in Berry and Cass in Michigan. Connexus is an organization that has not only grown to actually provide government-funded employment services, but they're also providing a host of other workforce development employment service programs on behalf of private philanthropy and on behalf of employers and businesses. And they've actually created a suite of tools that allow them to manage those various relationships with different kind of funders through a single customer relations management system. And they also have a unified grants management system that allows them to effectively manage all of those dollars that are connected to various programs that are being provided throughout the community, in part in the American Job Centers, but also in partnership with a number of other community-based organizations that they partner with to provide employment service and workforce development services. This last one is in Washington State. This is Spokane Workforce Development Council. One of the most interesting things that they're doing among a number of different tech interventions that are all geared towards trying to provide a more human-centered approach to interacting with job seekers as they come into the Career Center, is actually taking an application called Tables Ready, which was designed to actually service restaurants and help them manage their reservations. They've applied that technology to actually help manage wait times within their American Job Center. So no longer does someone just have to grab a ticket potentially and sit and wait and wonder when they'll be called, but they actually are able to register for services and to meet with a counselor all through a mobile application that was customized by Spokane Workforce Development Council to specifically solve an employment service issue with an application that was designed to actually manage tables in restaurants. I think we may have a few minutes. I'm not seeing anybody like frantically cutting us off, but I'll kick it back over to Pam to field some questions. I think we'd be happy to answer some questions or dive a little bit deeper into some of the things that I know we only had an opportunity to go through briefly.
Just a quick check. How much time do we have?
5 minutes.
5. Okay.
So I'm from one of those private organizations who feels like we have something to offer and wants to help and wants to be a part of this. So, but it's often hard to get in touch with the right folks. And so how do you like to be approached? Is it generally through that procurement process? Is that the only way to knock on the door, or what's the best way to bring some of these ideas and solutions to the table to have a conversation? Because from our perspective, I'm in education technology, we believe there are opportunities for us to leverage our successes from higher ed in the workforce development space. But how do we even bring those hypotheses to the table?
We've created this thing called JFF Labs. So no, I mean, really not being too cheeky about it. The whole creation of JFF Labs was in service of trying to create a forum where we could create more open space for entrepreneurs, for social enterprise, for education and job tech companies to actually come to us and try and bridge that gap with some of the traditional systems. In my career, working really on behalf of and in service of workforce systems, I am sensitive to how many calls and how inundated they are with, hey, there's a tech for that. Hey, we have a solution to all your problems. And I really don't blame them too much for wanting to just turn off the phone and be like, I'll wait for someone else to buy it. And when they buy it, then I'll look at it. And I imagine that those are some frustrations that you've had. I would highly encourage you to come up to me after the session. Through JFF Labs, we've actually created an acceleration program where we are actually taking startups in this space and bringing them in early to help ask some of those questions around how do we actually design products that are not only in service of the systems, but also really keep some of those 20 million people in mind that we're trying to serve. So we're building an entire infrastructure at JFF to really try and host more conversations with companies and with entrepreneurs, because I think gone are the days of the kind of the government and the vendor relationship. We have to break down all of those walls and really start thinking about how we work together to create, again, going back to that slide, something that is truly technology optimized, but is still human centered. And I think we're getting a lot closer to that than maybe we've been in even the last couple of years.
And I would say from the workforce ITSC perspective, we are creating that solutions marketplace for people to be able to see those kinds of solutions. And my organization hosts a variety of conferences where there's exhibitors and consultants that attend. And it's an opportunity for our members to see those products and also for you to meet my members. So, any other questions? All right.
Last one.
Last one, apparently.
Thanks. On your procurement marketplace, just to step back, before you procure, I mean, there was some state workforce agencies and some deployments that were doing in-house solutions, or sort of like they built themselves. Are they also profiled in some of the best practices? I mean, I can understand that we want to celebrate what we bought and it works, but are there things that work that are built by, I guess, public servants?
Yes, that is part of our 2.0 version that we were going to be building, so definitely they will be present there also. But the trend is to go towards private solutions, so we wanted to begin there first to make that, time and cost. Yeah. So I think that's it for us. Thank you for sticking around with us for the tour of workforce technology in the United States. You know, it's a big apple and we're taking small methodical bites out of it. Any closing words from our friends?
I think the one thing I would like to add here really is just a big thanks to Pam and Scott and Charlie for inviting me here to this conversation. I've spent so much of my career really I've been in almost every state in the country asking questions about workforce development and trying to understand how our systems work here. And it's not to say that I've seen it all or I've discovered it all or answered all my questions about how things work here in the United States. But I'm certainly at a point where I'm starting to ask questions that go beyond the walls of the United States. Where are other innovations happening across the globe? Where are some of those common challenges, and how might we actually create more effective knowledge exchange? And I think this is a great example, and to be introduced to WAPES is just such a gift for me, kind of personally and professionally, but also for JFF, which has historically really just been focused on trying to solve some of the challenges around American education and workforce ecosystems. To have this opportunity to open up conversation with some of our international colleagues is just something that I'm quite excited about. So please don't hesitate to come and introduce yourself to me.
Thank you, IDB.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam, Patti, and